Welcome, welcome, everyone. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it is the Coffee Break Show, and I am so excited to be here. But first, as always, we have to begin with the music. We'll see you guys in a second. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I just want to start today by saying we are going to have one of the most powerful conversations with our guest today, which is Justin Caffrey. And what I want to tell you all about him. At the same time, I kind of want him to tell his story. Hedge fund entrepreneur, professional. I see you guys climbing on board. Do me a favor and put your name down below and be part of the conversation. What had something very tragic happen to him. I'm going to let him tell the story. And he turned and transformed his life. I mean, you always hear that thing about taking lemons and making lemonade. Well, this is going to be deeper and stronger than that. Darlene, nice to see you're on. And I'm thinking this is Darlene Manchego. And if it is, good morning. Welcome to the Coffee Break Show. So happy you're here. There's my better half. Good morning. Welcome, Justin. And that's what I want to say. Oh, Ryan's already on as well. Thank you. Nice to see you guys popping on. See the smiley faces here. I see all you guys popping on. Thank you for being here. We're going to have a great conversation. Justin, I just want to welcome you to the Coffee Break Show and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Vickie. I really appreciate being your guest, and hi to everybody who's coming on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I want to begin the conversation and say, how does one go from being a top hedge fund manager? How does one go from having a corporate career to having a master's degree in mindfulness? What was the transition? What was the transformation? What I want you to be able to tell your story to see, to what happened.
Sure. Well, I can honestly say that if you were asking me or telling me, 10, 15 years ago that this is where I would be and this is how my life would be, I would have laughed and not believed in a second, because from the age of 19, I was involved in the world of money. I dropped out of university studying computer science and ended up in the city of London, which is,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much like New York. So it's a major global hub. And I worked in banking there for 4 years. And at the age of 23, 24, I set up my own firm. And we built a pretty big firm of 200 odd people
Wow.
over the next few years, and all the success that comes with that. So, money, cars, houses, multiple very famous, successful racehorses. So all of the kind of material trappings and trophies that we're all aspiring to get. However, the more you accumulate, the more you feel you have to accumulate, because you're in this constant
Yeah.
pursuit of, how do I actually find happiness? I'm sure it was going to be when I got this car, this
When
house,
I achieved this thing.
it was never there, and it was always lingering. But I was I was definitely on a roller coaster ride. I was a unquestionable workaholic in terms of my approach and my commitment. And I got married. I had my second son, or sorry, my first son was born in 2007. And life was pretty charmed. It couldn't have been much better. But we decided to go on a vacation just before our second child was born. So my wife was just under 6 months pregnant, 26 weeks at the time, and we went on a vacation. We went to Spain from London. It was warm, it was sunny, it was great to have a few days and then come back and prepare for the second child. And while we were there, her waters broke. She went into labor. Our second child was born at 27 weeks, and we were stuck in a foreign country with a language that we didn't speak. And He was in neonatal intensive care for 7 months, and
Wow.
we never made it home. So
Yeah.
life kind of stopped. Now, luckily, I'd sold out of my business probably eight or 9 months before this all happened.
Mm,
So I was able to be there and be with them. So that was a huge blessing.
yeah.
And then after 7 months, we were hoping that we would get our opportunity to get back to the UK by air ambulance, because Joshua was still very unwell. He had multiple blood transfusions. He had
Wow.
lesions on the brain. Um, he had pneumonia several times, um, and he'd been put on life support 4 times over 8 months. So we eventually got an opportunity where we found a window to air ambulance him home, and we were preparing for that, and he got ill again. So we needed him to be in pretty good shape to survive the plane ride, and we were kind of stuck again, waiting, and we then spent two and a half months training as his carers, because we knew he was going to
Mm,
have long term medical requirements, and he was terminally ill, unquestionably at that stage, but the the time on which he would survive was relatively unknown. We knew that he had cerebral palsy, um, but as parents, you don't mind. He's alive.
mm-hmm.
He's our son. We love him dearly, and we do whatever we had to do to get through the fight. But sadly, as it wound up towards the end of that year, which was 2010, it was Christmas Eve. We'd actually had Joshua out of hospital for 2 weeks again, and this looked like great. Okay, we now have a window. He was oxygen dependent. He was tube fed. We had to clean out his lungs with machines. We were trained to do all this, and we had him with us in our home in Spain. And the aim was that we'd get through 3 weeks, and then we could air ambulance him. And he fell ill again. Went back to
Mm,
hospital, and on Christmas Day, they put him back on life support once more. But this time they said to us, we're not going to do it anymore. They said, look, we know your story. We know
mm,
how hard you guys have been fighting for the year, but
mm.
his life is just not able to be part of this world. And every time we get him to a point where we think he's strong enough, he falls back. And when you're doing rehab with a small baby, as we were at that stage, whenever they're
Yeah.
intubated and put back on life support, all of that goes out the window. And the amount of drugs required, and the physical pain that the child goes through is severe. So we kind of knew that we'd come to the end of the road, um, which is tough as a family. And we resigned ourselves to the reality that the next time he was ill, we weren't going to be able to help him. And over the course of the next 4 weeks, we got him back home with us again. We got them to agree to help us with palliative care. And we were very, very lucky that we got him to die with us at home, which is a huge privilege when you've spent so much of your life in hospital with a child. So we were very pleased to
Yes.
have that
Yes.
experience. Um, and then we sadly, Joshua died just before his first birthday.
Oh,
And
gosh.
yeah, so that was kind of like um, a big change, a big impact on our lives. And I'd love to say that that was the
Yeah.
moment that I felt inspired to change my life. But that didn't really happen. It took me another 2.5 years, because I went back from that position and built another financial services company, and
Sure.
had a whole period of time where I'm traveling all over the world, to the US and Australia and Asia. And then I had a panic attack in a really important meeting. Um,
Oh,
and
God. Panic attacks, they're like a trip to hell.
Totally. I actually thought I was having a heart attack or a stroke. And to give you an insight into the lunacy of my mind at that stage, I thought, it's not a really bad heart attack or stroke. So I should be able to still close the deal because I had a bunch of clients in the
Oh
room.
God.
And then I'll
Oh,
deal with this in hospital afterwards. Like that's how crazy my mind still was. Um, but it was
wow.
after that I realized. I went home. I saw my wife. I told her what was going on, and she just said, "Look, I think you need to get some help and to talk to somebody and see how you were." Because I went to the hospital, they checked that I didn't have a heart attack, so it was unresolved grief.
Yeah.
That was my
Yeah.
post-traumatic stress disorder moment, and it all kicked in, and I had extreme anxiety for weeks after that. And that was really when I started to realize that, okay, I'm not superhuman. I have to
Mhm.
accept the death of my son, and I have to grieve, and I have to be like everybody else. And that gave me a
Yeah.
chance to slow down and think about life quite differently.
Yeah, we have a lot of, comments here from people. I have somebody here who is, with you. Yikes, my youngest daughter was born 26 weeks, 4 days. They needed intensive support care when born that early. And somebody said stressful. Yes, yes, yes. What an emotional roller coaster. Yes. Somebody else said, "What is a recovering capitalist?" Yes, that could be that. Let's see. Value shifting event, no doubt. Absolutely. These are the kinds of things where you question what's important to you and when you go through these things and you still try to keep a strong face or a strong persona, and really what you need is to grieve, and you're not letting yourself do that. So I want to really speak directly to the person out there that's listening to this show. I don't know if you're listening on iHeartRadio or Spotify or Pandora or Amazon. I don't know where you're listening. I don't know if you're driving or you're sitting down, but maybe you've come to the point in your life where you've had these kind of stresses or you felt these kinds of panic attacks, and you're not allowing yourself to grieve or not allowing yourself to feel how you feel, like you think you need to have a stiff upper lip while things are shattering around you. And I just want to go a little further, because these kinds of transformations in the world right now, the world is tumultuous, and there's a lot of people leaving their careers. There's a lot of people who've lost everything to a natural disaster, whether it's a fire or a flood. There's a lot of angst about losing your business. There's a lot of transition going on. And in these kinds of stresses that we're feeling right now, there is a lot of loss. And we're talking about loss today with Justin, and we are learning about how now we've got the first part of the story, which is what happened to him. And I think the loss of a child is probably something that is, and one of the probably the top pain. I can't even imagine it. The top pain somebody can go through. And so after you've gone to the hospital and you've gotten to the point where your wife has said, "Hey, maybe you need to check things out. Maybe you need to slow down." What was the impetus? What happened where you made the changes and, continue your story is so compelling right now. And I'm riveted, and I want to hear the continuance of how you manage, how you transformed, and why you've chosen to do what you do now.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, I think, like as one of your listeners commented there, recovering capitalist. I was very much at that stage intoxicated in terms of
Mhm.
work and success and materiality, and the whole idea of me and me as I'd see myself in the world was very much defined about around my business successes.
Yeah.
Um, I realized that I wasn't well. I was starting to struggle with anxiety. I had really intrusive and obsessive thoughts all the time, and I needed to get help. But didn't want to go down the road of just going to my own physician because I knew that would be just medication. There was only one option there. And my father, when I was growing up, suffered from mental health and all his life, and had been heavily medicated. So I really wanted to see, is there another path before I take that. And not to say that, in many circumstances medication is a good thing, but for me, that was my
Yeah.
one true focus. So I found a psychiatrist to help me, who became my mentor and teacher and good friend, Dr. Pradeep Chadha. And he was an Indian gentleman who was living between London and Dublin in Ireland. He'd given up the nature of his normal practice as a psychiatrist because he felt after 25 years he was not really resolving people's problems through the prescribing of medication.
Yep.
And he actually went back towards more Vedic traditions and teachings from his grandfather. So I read about him. I heard him on a radio show. I went to see him, and I went into therapy with him for 4 months. That profoundly changed my life. He introduced me to meditation. He
Mm.
introduced me to the particular type of therapy which I was using at that stage for PTSD, which is very much getting right to the nub of your pain. So instead of avoiding the death of Joshua, learning to speak about it and recognize that, as tragic as it is in the past. So much of our anxiety and
That's right.
especially PTSD sufferers is that it's this reoccurrence, that it's almost
Correct.
happening in the moment. Um,
Mhm.
so I found that profoundly powerful. And when we'd finished therapy, I said to him, I'd like you to teach me what you do. And I think this is a path that I want to be on. So I spent the next 2 years studying with Pradeep.
Mm.
And then I rocked up to my board and my shareholders and told them I was leaving. They all thought I'd
Whoa.
lost the plot,
Yeah.
and that I was lying and I must be setting up another firm. And there's no way I'm leaving, the financial markets. And but I did. And then I went on to study a master's in mindfulness-based interventions at our
Mm.
main psychological school here in Ireland, and then focused on neuroscience. So really getting into the nuts and bolts of what's happening in our nervous system and why are we dysregulated and what's happening.
Mm.
And here I am. And in the midst of all that, I found Buddhism and spirituality, and but ultimately, I always say I found me, and I'd lost
Yes.
me a long time ago.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing that you're just saying there. People think that when they have an awakening moment, they don't realize when they were first lost and how far back we have to go. And, what self-realization is for me, that's the journey that is the most fulfilling, is that, when you're doing the journey of meeting you, who you actually are, and what it is that you actually want to have, be, and do in this life, you'll find out that it's the smaller section of life that you actually want. And I remember making some choices in my life so that was my primary thing. That is my primary lifestyle. What I want to know is what I want to know what you do now. I mean, I know the power of meditation or contemplation, do it every morning, and I get that. And what I want to go into what mindfulness is, because there's a lot of people that don't know what awareness and mindfulness is. And even though they hear it, you need to be more aware and more mindful. Nobody has an actual definition for people that is more solid, that is definable in a way that people can use. And I'm wondering, what is your definition of it and how do you apply it in your day?
Sure, great question. I think keeping it most simple, it's awareness of this moment and being able to pay attention to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds a little bit aloof, but I suppose even if I'm sitting here talking to you now, I'm I'm grounding myself by being aware of my toes on the floor, my bum on the
Yes.
seat. It's this connection to the present moment, because when we're caught in all the thoughts and all the negative self-talk, it brings us off into almost another sphere. So people can be semi-present because there's actually 10 conversations going on in their head. So it's learning to be more able to be with yourself. And I suppose a great example of mindfulness for many people would be to understand that these practices are used even in the military. If you look at special forces, if you look at Navy SEALs, when you're in a drop zone and you come out of an aircraft and you parachute in, when they land and they hit the ground, they have to be able to shift their nervous system to what's called a parasympathetic state, to the state of awareness and being connected to your executive function. And they use breath work. And this goes right back to, I mean, I trained with the samurai in Japan, and the samurai
Wow.
lineage then went on to the Navy SEALs. And it's the same process, because when you arrive in an area of danger, you must be able to make sure that your nervous system doesn't go into fight and flight. You must be present to your own experience. So the opposite of fight and flight is rest and recovery. It's where we're connected to our
Hmm.
prefrontal cortex, where all of the smart stuff goes on in our head. And mindfulness has the power for you to manage your nervous system. And all mental health issues predominantly are a dysregulation of one's nervous system. And neuroscience has given us some incredible insights in the last 20 years. But in the East, in Buddhist psychology, in Vedic medicine, they've known this mind body connection, the whole of the
That's
human,
right.
for 2,000 years.
Long time. Long time. I have a lot of Buddhist background. My parents were Buddhist, and thus I was kind of raised in that. So I want to pop over here. Um, Brilliant, moving from fight to flight to rest to recovery. Yes, this is a big thing. We're so hustle and grind in our world. We don't think of rest and recovery and how it applies to helping us become mindful and aware and peaceful. For me, I think that awareness and mindfulness, when when I practice meditation, when I am contemplative in that way, there is a part of me that can see the difference between me and my mind. And when I can hold that difference between me and my mind, not my mind is me, but me and my mind, there is a gap. And even if the gap is seconds, even if that gap is there, it lets me know that there is something else beyond my thinking. And what happens for me is that I get to the point where I feel investigative. I want to know more about that. I want to know more about how I work and how my mind works, so that the practice of, contemplation or even prayer or meditation in that way helps me understand the difference between being in the moment with me and being in the moment with my thinking mind. And it's not that my thinking mind is bad or wrong. It's that when I want to be able to have I want to be have say over my mind versus my mind having say over me or constantly ruling me. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, because what happens is when we think we can achieve success, and I know this latter because I've been here and got burnt, but when we achieve success, we have a feeling in ourselves that somehow that is going to solve the pain. You know how they always say there's the question under the question or the
Mhm.
feeling under the feeling? One of the most silent feelings that we have is what you said earlier about, well, when I achieve this certain place, my life is going to be extraordinary, great, the illusion that we say to ourselves. And I remember feeling all of that when I had all the cars and all the houses, and all of a sudden I was thinking, I don't need this many houses. I really don't like real estate. And I don't need all these cars. I really can only drive one at a time. There's a point where you have to have a come to Jesus meeting with yourself and say, what are you doing? How is it just through the pain? How is it that you can get real with yourself without um without going through the pain of what you're going through? Like, you had the loss of a child, still went back, and you had to wait for the panic attack, wait for something else. How can we not wait till we hit rock bottom? Or maybe that's part of the process, who knows? How can we do something that will enable us to take an action right now where we're introducing ourselves to ourselves? How do we do that?
Yeah, great. I mean, I think for me, the challenge was that I was unquestionably a workaholic, and I think like any addict, it's very difficult to see past your addiction. So it was always going to be a
Yes.
rock bottom moment for me. Unfortunately, that was going to make me
Mm,
wake up and think about life differently. I think for most people, the opportunity and what presents to them is this sense of, the daily grind, the daily torture of the way that we speak to ourselves. As I say to people quite often,
yes.
if you had a friend who spoke to you like the way you speak to yourself, you wouldn't maintain that friendship. But yet we tolerate the inevitable continuous critique coming from the voices in our
Mhm.
head. And it's meditation, mindfulness, my work on neuroscience and looking at the vagus nerve. I try to always make things as simple as I possibly can, and I think the most important thing and the discipline to work towards is the capacity to try and be present to an experience like me talking here today, just being here. I'm not caught in my mind somewhere else. But even as one of your guests has said here, as an entrepreneur, finding myself thinking of three or more things at once, and
Hang on,
consequently, I'm not
Pop.
able to
This is
focus.
Let me
That one,
put it
yeah.
up there. Say, that's Ryan. Nice to see you. As an
Hi, Ryan.
entrepreneur, I find myself thinking of three or more things at once, and consequently, I'm not able to focus on one thing to fruition as I'm trying to have balls in the air at the same time. Yes, so many people do this, and I got to admit, I'm guilty of this as well. And one of the things I've learned to say to people is, I just can't multitask. That just
Mm.
isn't me. I can do the one thing and be present with the one thing at the time, but the doing two things at once, yeah, that is, um, yeah, thank you. And
I
somebody
think
just
that's
wanted to
that's
say
kind of
hi to
typical.
you. Yeah,
Hi,
that is
thank you,
very
Ryan.
hard.
It's really hard. It's really hard, and I think what becomes interesting, and one of the little tricks that I teach people is in learning meditation, mindfulness, and getting a better understanding of your nervous system and simple neuroscience. I teach people that every day when you have a practice, it's like you're inflating your own personal crash helmet, because we can't
That's right.
change how life impacts us, but we can change how we are affected by the impact. So if you can imagine, you put the work in every day, you do your meditation, your practice, maybe you work with cold water as well. So you're like inflating your own crash helmet. So life will still happen, but when the next big event comes along, and it's like that punch in the head and it knocks you over, the
Mhm.
aim is, by building a practice over time, the event will still arrive, but instead of it being a deadly impact that hits you, it's boom.
That's right.
You feel it, you notice it, but you're able to say, well, okay, this big major issue that's just happened here, is this more important than what I'm focusing on right now? Or should I conclude what I'm doing? So it gives you that sovereignty to find the space between that moment and where you are, and then choose, where should I
That's
place
right.
my attention? Whereas normally we're just firefighting. The next thing comes along, I'm dealing with that, and nothing gets completed. So it's a really focused discipline in terms of where one is able to place your attention. And that's hugely beneficial if you're a mom, if you're a son, a brother, a human, a worker, a boss, whatever it is. Having the capacity to be more attentive to what's ahead of you and in front of you, and be present to yourself, is a huge skill.
And that to me is one of the practices that I think are so important to have your day in that plan. You know how they talk about having something become unconsciously competent over a period of time?
Yeah.
This is the practice that I do every day, and why I do it every day, because I want that to be my knee-jerk reaction, or the unconsciously competent, that ability to choose. This is the thing, you use this word and I really loved it. That moment of being able to choose, that is sovereignty. That's where real freedom happens. That real freedom isn't the pushing away of something or the trying to get one up on something. It is the awareness that you use to choose the reaction you want to have, the thing that you want to have. And most people are trying to become free, but they don't actually know what becoming free is. And they think, well, if I'm financially free, then I'll be spiritually free, emotionally free, socially free, time free. And what ends up happening is that you've only dealt with one freedom. You've only looked at one way where freedom accesses itself. I think that uh, I like this right here. I just want to pop this on. I like that, a practice that provides a cushion from the world situations. That's right. That's a thing that is available through this practice. And I know a lot of people. I'm working on a project with a friend of mine on. It's a very big one, and this one stunned me for a bit. And it talks about what that our world is mostly medicated. There is not a lot of ability to learn how to deal with anxiety, stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, any kind of thing like there. What they want to do, especially if it's a long-term stress or a long-term pain or a long-term loss, is they feel as though medicating it for the short term, which never turns into the short term, it always turns into the long term, is then, and then you're just on the wheel of medication, medication, medication. You can't really meet yourself. And to me, that just prolongs the problem.
Totally. And not only prolongs it, but it introduces a whole new level of problems, because it's not unusual that somebody comes to work with me and they have multiple autoimmune issues, because
Oh,
this is what
yes.
happens when we don't deal with the trauma. And it's funny. I had an email today which was astounding to receive from a gentleman in Myanmar who's
Mm-hmm.
Australian.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Buddhist monk. He's been in a monastery in Myanmar, a very famous monastery, for 13
Mm-hmm.
years. And he'd been following some of my YouTube content around PTSD and neuroscience. And he said to me, I'm really interested to learn more about this, because I understand my background in terms of Buddhism. And he said, my issue is that the nature of how we're meditating and what we're being taught in the monastery is not helping me deal with my childhood trauma, and the teachers don't understand it
That's right.
because of where I am. And I was an addict, and I was an alcoholic, and I was a drug addict. This is the gentleman. And he says, I'm using meditation as a means to deal with it, but I'm not resolving the problem. And this ultimately comes back to the same
Beautiful.
issue,
Thank you for saying that so much.
because addicts, the problem I think so much of the time we face, like, and 12-step programs are absolutely fantastic, but we must be able to assist people with the reason why they were drinking or abusing drugs or whatever it is.
Yes,
There's something wrong. It's not healthy people do not become addicts. It's a natural response
that's
to
correct.
an unresolved trauma. And this was a great example of that, where you have somebody who spent 13 years as a Buddhist monk, but still
Mm-hmm.
knows the unresolved trauma. So that's why I think meditation is powerful, but also connecting to our trauma, getting close to it. And despite the difficulty that it may have, what I always say is it's already here. I use the analogy of, like, the old movie cars, when the wedding party would leave, and they have the tin cans tied to the
Yeah.
back of the car, and they're rattling as the car goes up.
Yes.
We all have these tin cans tied behind us. They're all of our problems, right? And we're all desperately running away in the fight and flight response. I don't want to have to deal with all of the, stuff that's gone on in my past. But no matter how fast you run, it keeps being tethered to you. So the opportunity and the alternative response is, what's it like to sit with it, to be with it, and actually reach behind and pull it close and really get to know it. And that's what the
Mm-hmm.
power for me with coming to terms with Joshua's death was. I didn't want to deal with it,
Mm.
but as I learned to sit with it and remember his final moments and see him over and over again dying, those really painful moments,
Yeah.
when I came to terms with them, it opened up another door, which allowed me to see the whole of his 11 months, and the great memories that we have as a family,
Mm.
and the appreciation that I have from being there. But the way that PTSD
Mm.
works from a neuroscientific perspective is it only shows you the bad moment, and it won't allow
Over
you
and
to
over
access the
again.
master memories. And we eventually have to lean into the trauma, and by doing so, we release so much. And for anybody who's listening, it's not an easy task, and by all means, seek help. But running from it, or medicating it away, or drinking it away, or abusing drugs to get away from it, it eventually, time has to come where you sit with it and you find peace with it, or you don't. I mean, my father died 2 years ago at 86. He was medicated all his life. Only in the last couple of years, when he was struggling with dementia, did he revisit a memory from his childhood when he was 12 and he was sexually abused. So he'd
Mhm.
locked that away and hidden that even from all his family and
Wow.
everybody else for a whole of his life, and was medicated. So no matter how bad it is, if you can come to terms with it, you can create so much freedom in terms of how you're living your life. And I think that's the spiritual awakening. That's the
Mhm.
real benefit, to help us feel into the whole of our lives, experience it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but experience life in firsthand.
I'm so riveted to this conversation. I have to tell you, my heart's up in my throat, and I feel so like the timeliness of this conversation is so important to the world right now. And those people out there who are listening, who are stressed out, or, moving past, or trying to introduce themselves to themselves and meet these things. Here's the thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about the not getting rid of something, whether that is a memory or a feeling, the not trying to squish something or move it away. Because the thing is, you're not the same person as you were before when you go through a trauma, or even if you go through some sort of success. Your goal is to be present with who you are right now, and that who you are right now is consistently changing. And you know how they say that nothing lasts forever. Well, neither does your state of beingness last forever, as long as you're learning to evolve with it or be with it. And the pushing away the trauma, or the pushing it underneath, or trying to bury it from yourself, is what is actually causing the discomfort or the illness. And so when you are masquerading it with, whether it's food or alcohol or some prescription drug and etc., it cannot be the forever way that you're going to transform yourself, because that thing keeps you in the same place. You as a human being just evolved naturally. But how do we start or begin to, let's say you're working with a therapist or a psychiatrist right now, and you decide that you want to move away from dosing in some way, and you want to begin the process, not all at once. We're not talking cold turkey here, but you would begin the process of detaching from the thing that is keeping you from meeting yourself, or keeping you in that same stuck place. What are maybe two or three things we can do to begin to gently, confrontationally meet ourselves differently?
Yeah, great question. I think in terms of a therapeutic approach, when we look at something like CBT,
Hmm.
which is fantastic, and it has great value in terms of its usage, but it's very much giving people the. What I'm
Hmm.
talking about is being with the difficulty. So it's kind of
Yeah.
immersion into your trauma. And the if I was to look at it in a scenario where somebody would come to me, and they might start working with me, um, generally I'm saying to people who have got high levels of anxiety, you're first of all dysregulated in terms of your nervous system, and a very good way to help you understand that you can connect back to a sense of yourself is cold water.
Mm.
And what's astounding, I've studied the benefits of cold water and how it impacts what's called your vagus nerve and your
Yeah.
vagal tone, for quite a few years. But we've been able to get some really solid research between the UK and Ireland during COVID, because a lot of people started cold water swimming, and they weren't really too sure why. And the Irish Sea or the English Channel
Yeah, it
is
is very cold.
it's not a place that you're like running down to thinking you're on Baywatch or something, right? So it's it's not a pleasant experience. And I live in a little town here, which is really famous for cold water swimming. And I've always had a great love of cold water, and part of my training in Japan was with the samurai was cold water too. So I really started to think, well, they've been doing it for like 1500 years. What's the neuroscience saying to us? And the
Mm.
best study was actually released in October last year, which was quite a detailed study. And what we've learned to realize is that when people are in cold water for 3 to 4 minutes, it actually turns the switch, which moves us from fight and flight to rest and recovery. Now,
Mm.
when you're in rest and recovery, that's where you should be 95% of the time. And 5% fight and flight is, when somebody's about to attack you. But modern living has kind of got us working the wrong way
Yes,
around.
that's right.
So cold water is a great way to allow somebody to feel what it's like to be present. And it has two
Yeah.
distinct things. One, you become pretty present when you're in cold water because it's quite a shock.
Yeah.
But we know that the way that the nervous system works is that after about 2.5 to 3 minutes, your nervous system initially reacts to, oh my God, this is going to kill me. I don't want to be in cold water. But then it switches and you move into this parasympathetic state. So you become very aware and present and conscious of your
Mhm.
surroundings. But we've seen the data in the studies to show that the dopamine impact, so again, think about alcohol, drugs, pornography, sex, food. These are all in the pursuit of dopamine. But
Mhm.
cold water, after being in cold water for 45 minutes, the dopamine effect lasts for 3 to 4 hours. And the big question we always got was how can people keep coming back to persecute themselves in the winter in cold water? And they don't even cognitively know why they come back, but they know that there's a connection and a sense of themselves that draws them back to
Mm.
cold water. And that's like a really good
Interesting.
step into why would I do the work to come to terms with all of the problems and challenges and traumas in my life? Because instead of just having the benefit of receiving it through cold water, you can have the benefit of being present all the time. So it's a nice way for people to test it. And if you
Mm.
want to try it at home, just do 30 seconds at the end of your shower, allow cold water to be there and work
Yeah.
yourself up to kind of 2 or
I'm
3
gonna
minutes.
try that. I have to try it. It's the second day in a row I've heard about this, so I think something in the universe is hinting me about it, but I'm gonna go try that. It would not be my favorite thing. I'm definitely a warm water girl. We have a question from the audience that I am interested in. What does it mean to come to terms with it as someone who has trauma around loss?
Yeah. So, and thank you for that because come to terms with it is a really broad statement.
Mhm.
Um, so in many ways, and generally within my own work with people on a one-to-one basis, it comes to forgiveness more often than not.
Mm.
And to speak of my own situation, when a child dies and you're a parent, you feel huge levels of guilt. Um,
Absolutely.
what if I did this? What if we
What
did
if I
that?
did that? What did I do wrong? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so much
Mhm.
of it is my fault. And part of the process is finding the sense to forgive yourself. And I do that in session with people, but then also it's often about forgiving other people. And when I look at Joshua, for me, always was the straw that broke the camel's back. His death led me on a discovery path. But many other things happened in my life that were unresolved, and relationships as a child, and growing up in a difficult household. So I also had to find forgiveness for my parents, forgiveness for people who have wronged me in my life. But every time we find that sense of forgiveness, as I said about those tin cans, each time you get to let go of something, it's like you reach behind, you grab the
Yeah.
tin can and you cut the string and you set it down. So coming to terms with it
Beautiful.
is to no longer feel like it's rattling behind you,
Ooh.
and you're happy to move on and no longer hold on to whatever it is that was eating you up. like the pain, I often say to people, is like a double-edged sword. I hate this person because they persecuted me. So we're like pushing the sword towards them,
Yeah.
but as we retract it, we're hitting it into ourselves. So the letting go of that torment releases so much within each one of us, and that's where
Mm.
there's huge amounts of freedom.
Thank you for that. That was so powerful to hear. Um, that coming to terms with things and the ability to forgive, it's so interesting because even as an abused child myself, one of the things that happened for me was it was very easy to forgive my abuser. As an adult, I had to actually find out that I had to forgive the child in me who thought she was bad, that I had done something wrong, and that forgiveness is so powerful. It's so subtle, and yet we hold our torch song, so to speak, about being abused or victimized by that. That was powerful. I loved that forgiveness is a big key. You forgive yourself all the way through it. I see the other questions. I'm going to pop over here. Escape is the go-to for dealing with the pain, yet the paradox is to lean into the pain, question mark.
Yeah. So this is the big one. And to go back to the point, which is relevant in terms of forgiveness. It's not forgiveness up here. It's forgiveness
Mhm.
deep inside your heart. It's the forgiveness of the whole of your being. And the paradox absolutely is, what is it like if I just lean into what I'm trying to get away from? Because anybody who has been through a challenge, and as you have, Vicky, which is the most difficult of challenges, to be an abused child. When we are an adult and we reflect back on those difficulties, often, so many times I've heard people feel guilt around being the abused child. Maybe it was my fault. I've got something to do
Yeah,
with
I
this.
did something to do with it. Yeah, it's
All that
like
kind of
that's
stuff.
the mhm.
And I think one of the great challenges is that when something happens to us when we're younger, we have to reflect back on the fact that in that moment of being 6 or 8 or 10,
Mhm.
our whole world was generally school and
Yeah.
home life, right?
Mhm.
So, like, if one of those places is where you end up facing abuse, 50%
Mhm.
of your world has blown up.
Yeah.
And the trauma is massive. So, we must look back on these traumatic moments through the eyes of the child, not the adult who thinks, I should have been able
Yes.
to get over that. And I always say, people will come to me and they talk to me, and we'll have a discussion around, I want you to tell me all the times in your life where you felt challenged or hurt or abused or spoken poorly to. And I'd say to them, I want you to reflect on this within our conversation. And anything that comes to mind is important, because we've had 100,000, 200,000 interactions in our life. So if you ask your mind to just bring you back to your earliest memory of your childhood, and then you sit with your eyes closed and just reflect on all the times in your life where you felt hurt or abused by another person, they are the moments that you need to find to
Mm.
come to terms with. Because if your memory is kicking them
Yes.
up, they're very relevant. So it's the paradox is, how good has life been whilst you've been trying to escape from the pain? And eventually, most people come and sit down and say, well, okay, that hasn't worked out very well. And for me, when
Mhm.
I went into therapy, the day before I started my therapy, I was planning my own suicide. It had come to the point where I decided I can't cope with what's going on in my head anymore. The noise is deafening, the torment is horrendous. And I had multiple autoimmune issues going on in my body at the same time. But we
Mm.
either decide that we are willing to continue to pursue this relentless dash from the pain, knowing it's tethered to us. And then eventually the paradox is,
Mm.
well, okay, how if I sit with it and try to come to terms with it? It's not easy. I'm not advocating for 1 second that this is a simple process, but I say to people, how are you getting on trying to run from it?
Yes. And you mentioned something I want to drop back today. That friend of mine, I told you we're working on a project together. The thing that got me was that the data came in that I had just learned 60% of the people are medicated. Suicide is higher than any time ever in the history of humankind right now. And for those of you who are listening, who are on the edge right now, those of you who are absolutely um, looking at, what he just said, the day before I was planning my suicide, the option to go get help is there for you. You do not have to do this alone. You do not have to run from your pain anymore. You do not have to drown in it either. You can go get some help right now. Thank you for bringing that up right now. We do have another, and I want to talk about this because it's so evident out in the ethers. One of our listeners, we are constantly triggered into fight or flight by media. No, I would say yes, but if you pay attention to it. But what is your feedback for this question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's completely spot on. I mean, our main bias and the reason why after 200,000 years we're at top of the food chain on this planet is because we have a negative bias. So whenever we interact with anything in the world, we don't interact with it and go, "Is this quite nice? Oh no, it's a danger."
Mhm.
Our immediate instinct and the way that our nervous system works is it sees everything as a threat to my life. So it's like, oh, stop, this is a threat to my life. And then when it decides it's not a threat to my life, then it allows you to get close to it. And the way that the news cycle works, the nature of the music and the intonation and the bad news, like nobody's watching news channels for good news. So they know that our negative bias is just primed to seek out danger. That's how we've mastered the planet after
That's right.
200,000 years.
Yeah.
So it's avoiding that. And I think there's that fine line. Like I was a news junkie big time when I was in the
Of
financial
course.
markets. Like it was just part of
Sure.
what I had to do.
Mhm.
um but now I really try and regulate my interaction. I don't think we should cut ourselves off completely, because I think it's important to have some sense of what's going on in the world, but equally to arrive at it and know that they're only going to try and stimulate my nervous system. They know, I mean, news cycles is all about the negative bias. They've got the neuroscience nailed. So recognizing that and just saying, okay, yeah, they're just stimulating my negative bias, and then being able to discern, is this really something I need to worry about? And that's the
Mhm.
ultimate. I mean, the key secret within Buddhism and within a lot of Eastern traditions is learning to be able to be with what it is that I can influence and control. And for everything else, I don't need to really go there. And
Beautiful.
the news cycle is a big part of that.
That's right. It is. It is the propaganda. It's not a machine now, it's an assault. Last question today, guys, because we're getting to the top of the hour, and I have one or two questions I want to ask him as well. Thank you for participating today. It sounds like forgiveness is not necessarily one and done, but continues. That to me is kind of the Ho'oponopono question. Yes.
Absolutely. It's continuous, and it's a felt sense of forgiveness. It's deeply felt within your soul, within your heart, within your being. And you often have to, go back and reconnect to that forgiveness, because especially if somebody is still within your life, like, a
Yes.
parent who you may have to forgive, you constantly have to go back and find that sense. But it's powerful, but it requires a deep connection.
I have I feel so blessed by our conversation today.
Thank you.
And I just want to tell those people out there that are listening to this a way to connect with you. How is it that they can be in contact with you if they're listening to this show and they would like to, talk to you or hire you or have you come talk to their people? How do they get in contact with you?
Sure. The best way to connect with me is just via my website, which is justincaffrey.com. There's also a ton of free resources that I put onto YouTube. So if you go to my YouTube channel, I put a lot of stuff on there around the neuroscience, the nervous system, the psychology. So there's some great
What's the
stuff for
name of
people
your
connecting
YouTube
this.
channel? We'll put that up there. Robin, could you put up justincaffrey.com and his YouTube channel as well? So it is in the thread. So if you're driving right now, please drive safe, stay safe. The links are going to be in the show notes today, and you can just click on them. There is justincaffrey.com. Here's his website. And what is your YouTube channel? Is it
Same
still
again, just
Justin
Justin
Caffrey?
Caffrey, and it comes up. So if you go onto YouTube and type my name in, a whole bunch of stuff will come. There's multiple guided meditations where I help people understand how to kind of slow down. There's special meditations to help you connect to your vagus nerve and understand the
Great.
neuroscience as well. So there's a whole ton of resources there. And I share something new every Sunday around neuroscience and mindfulness and meditation, and just to try and give people some sense of help for themselves.
I want to tell everybody that Robin put in the show notes like every way you can connect with him on LinkedIn, on
Oh yeah, great! Wow,
Twitter, and on Instagram. He's just everywhere you want to find out. I think that they always talk about, Justin, the hero's journey. And you've shared your hero's journey with us today, and it has proven to be so transformational. It's touched my heart really deeply
thank you.
that you had the willingness to not just go through, but to be able to share your journey with other people is the strongest, most compelling way that we can help each other through the world. And I just want to thank you for being on the show today. It has been absolutely deep, touching, heart loving, blissful to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Vickie. You're very kind. It's been my pleasure, and thank you for those who contributed, and for those who are listening. I hope it's helped in some little way today.
All right. I want you to know that as well as next week's guest and the guest after that, I want you guys to jump on, go subscribe to his channel, and go be with him on his YouTube channel and connect with him, because you're going to get all those free resources there. And for those of you who are suffering right now, you do not have to suffer alone. Thank you for this. Yes, there is the thank you, Justin. Powerful words. Great show, you guys. Thank you. And here's YouTube channel finally got up there. Justin Caffrey is there. Thank you for this, another transformational show. Thank you, Ryan, for everyone for being here. But as always, it's time to listen to the music. I'll see you guys next week.